Jero sat with his boots on the control panel, a half-eaten protein bar in one hand and a blinking red light in the other. The red light wasn't supposed to blink like that, but Jero had long stopped worrying about small problems unless they were on fire. The freighter dust skimmer groaned slightly as it flew through the quiet black of space, its engines rattling like an old shopping cart. "Captain Jero," said a calm voice from the speaker, "you have an incoming message from Dock Authority Control." Jero sighed and sat up. "Loom, who wants me now?" "The Galactic Empire," replied the ship's eye. That made him freeze. "Did we forget to pay docking fees again?" "No. They are assigning you an official overseer." Jero blinked. "An overseer? For a cargo hauler like me? We're not even smuggling snacks." "The Empire has updated its rules. All human ships must now travel with a certified Imperial officer. For safety and discipline." Jero groaned. Of course they did. An hour later, the dust skimmer docked at Outpost 7. It was one of those floating metal stations that smelled like oil and old coffee. Jero stood at the hangar entrance, arms crossed, waiting to meet his new boss. His crew, Tarn, the grumpy mechanic, and Mika, the quiet navigator, stood behind him. Loom played cheerful background music, which annoyed Tarn instantly. They waited. Then the doors slid open with a hiss. Jero looked around, then looked down. Standing in front of him was someone no taller than his knee. A tiny creature with red armor, a sharp stare, and a very large voice. "I am Commander Vixa of the Doran Empire. This is my ship now." Jero's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You're the overseer." Vixa pointed a small metal rod at his chest. "Do you doubt the Empire's choices?" No, of course not," Jero said quickly, waving his hands. "Just surprised." Vixa marched past him like a drill sergeant. "Your ship smells of grease and poor planning. I will fix both." Tarn whispered, "She's 3 feet tall." "She heard that," Mika whispered back. Vixa turned sharply. "Yes, I did." Back on the ship, Vixa wasted no time. She walked into the engine room and shouted, "This is chaos. There are wires in the open, and this spanner is not in its correct place." Tarn looked like he was about to cry. In the cargo bay, she measured the stack of boxes with a tiny scanner. "Improper load balance. This crate is 2.3 centimeters off. Fix it." Jero scratched his head. "It's never fallen over before." "It will. Someday. And I do not allow someday failures." She moved on to the bridge, where she stood on a stool to reach the controls. "Your route planning is lazy. You skip checkpoint C-17. That is against Imperial travel guidelines." "I skip it because pirates usually wait there," Jero replied. "Then you should report the pirates and wait for Empire response." Jero raised an eyebrow. "That takes 2 weeks. That is the proper way." Jero leaned toward Mika and whispered, "We're in trouble." That night, Vixa assigned crew tasks, cleaned the eye's speaker grill, and wrote a 19-point improvement report. She even organized the storage closet. No one had ever done that before. Jero lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. "She's small," he said quietly, "but I think she could run the whole galaxy if she wanted." Loom replied, "Statistically, she might." In the corner of the room, Vixa sat cross-legged, typing on a glowing pad, muttering to herself about regulations and booster efficiency. The freighter was no longer Jero's alone. And things were just getting started. The next morning, Jero woke up to a loud sound. It was like someone tapping a metal spoon against his bunk. When he opened his eyes, he saw Commander Vixa standing there, holding a small data pad. "It is 600 hours, she said sharply. "Time to begin daily checks." Jero groaned. "Do you always wake people up like that?" "Yes. Sleep is not more important than safety." Jero sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Can I at least have breakfast first?" "You may eat while walking. Efficiency matters." He sighed. This was going to be a long trip. In the engine room, Tarn looked half asleep, but Vixa was already inspecting everything. She checked fuel levels, pipe pressure, and even the angle of a tool rack. "This wrench is 4.7 degrees tilted," she said. Tarn looked at the tool. "It still works." "That is not the point," she snapped. "Order shows control. Control prevents accidents." Tarn muttered something under his breath, but fixed the wrench anyway. At the navigation table, Mika was planning their route to the next delivery station, Station G47. It was a place known for trade, friendly workers, and cheap snacks. But it was also far off from official Empire routes. Jero leaned over her shoulder. "Take the path through Sector 9. It's quicker." Before Mika could answer, Vixa appeared like a shadow. "No, that is not an approved travel corridor," she said. Jero looked confused. "We've used that route for years. And it is not safe," she replied. "Empire protocol says to follow Route C-17. But pirates hang around C-17. Jero protested. Vixa didn't blink. "If you see pirates, you must report them and wait for a patrol. That takes 2 weeks. What do we do in the meantime?" "Play cards." Vixa crossed her tiny arms. "The rules are the rules." Jero looked at Mika and shrugged. "Well, you heard the boss." Mika didn't say anything. She quietly updated the route. The crew sat together in the dining area later that day. The food was warm, but the mood was cold. "I don't get it," Tarn said, poking his noodles. "Why is she like this? We're just moving crates, not flying a warship." "She probably grew up with a rule book in her crib," Jero replied. Mika, as usual, stayed quiet. Just then, Vixa entered the room. She was holding her datapad again. "I have created a daily task schedule," she said. "Each of you will follow it exactly. This includes cleaning, system checks, and safety drills." Jero raised an eyebrow. "Safety drills?" "Yes. Fire drill is at 1400. Hull breach drill is at 1600. Alien invasion drill is at 1800. Tarn dropped his fork. "Alien invasion? Unlikely, but always be prepared," she said seriously. Then she turned and walked out. Tarn looked at Jero. "Can we just put her in a crate and ship her back?" Jero chuckled. "Careful. She might hear that." From the hallway, Vix's voice called, "Yes, I can." Everyone froze. Later that night, Jero stood on the observation deck, watching stars drift past. He heard soft steps behind him. It was Vixa. "I do not enjoy being disliked," she said without looking at him. Jero was surprised by her honesty. "You're just a lot. I am trained to follow the rules. That is how we survive." Jero thought for a moment. "Sometimes breaking the rules helps us survive too." Vixa looked up at him. "That is not what the Empire teaches. Maybe the Empire doesn't know everything." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Vixa turned and walked away. But she didn't argue. That was something new. The next morning, Jero woke up to a ship-wide alarm blaring across the dust skimmer. It was the kind of alarm that made him jump out of bed faster than any regulation or order from Commander Vixa. He quickly grabbed his boots and raced to the bridge. "What's going on?" Jero asked, rubbing his eyes as he stood beside Mika at the navigation table. "A pirate ship," Mika replied calmly, tapping at the screen in front of her. "They've been shadowing us for the past hour." "Pirates," Jero repeated. "That's bad, right?" "Very bad," Mika said. "They'll try to board, steal the cargo, and probably damage the ship." Jero glanced around. "Where's Vixa?" Mika pointed to the hallway. "She's in the engine room." Jero groaned. "Of course she is." He quickly moved to the engine room, where he found Vixa carefully inspecting the fuel lines, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. "Commander," Jero shouted, "we've got pirates on our tail." Vixa looked up at him with a perfectly calm expression. "I know. Jero stared at her, blinking. You know. Yes, I've already calculated their position and trajectory, she said, tapping her datapad. They are 4 minutes away from boarding. Then we should get ready to fight them off. Jero said. We have weapons, don't we? Vixa shook her head. No, we will not engage. That would be against the Empire's standard procedure. Jero threw his arms up in frustration. Are you serious? Pirates are about to board our ship, and you want us to do nothing? Not nothing, she replied calmly. We will follow protocol. I will issue a warning and wait for a response from Imperial patrols. You can't be serious, Jero nearly shouted. We're just going to sit here and let them take everything. Vixa didn't flinch. Pirates do not follow protocol, but we do. If we follow the rules, we will be protected. Jero opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. He had been through pirate attacks before, and it never worked out when he waited around. But Vixa was not the type to listen to reason when she believed in the rules. Fine, Jero muttered. Let's wait then. 5 minutes later, the pirate ship finally came into view. A sleek, black vessel that looked more like a shark than a ship. It was circling the dust skimmer, looking for a weak point to latch onto. Jero stood next to the communication panel, his hand hovering over the controls. He had no idea how this was supposed to go down. Meanwhile, Vixa was calmly typing away on her datapad, sending a transmission to Imperial Command. The pirate ship made a sudden move, sliding alongside the dust skimmer with a loud metallic clang. The boarding clamps locked into place with a hiss. Jero felt his heart race. They're here, he said, turning to Vixa. Should we prepare to defend ourselves? I've already sent the alert, she said, not looking up. We will wait for Imperial instructions. Before Jero could respond, a voice crackled through the communication system. This is Captain Raz of the Black Fury. Surrender your cargo and prepare to be boarded. Vixa didn't flinch. This is Commander Vixa of the Dust Skimmer. I am under the protection of the Galactic Empire. You are hereby ordered to stand down. Jero stared at her. You're just going to talk to them. Vixa nodded. It is the correct procedure. Jero watched the screen in disbelief. The pirate captain's face appeared on the communication panel. He was a burly man with a scar across his cheek. He grinned. Protecting yourself with rules, huh? Captain Raz laughed. Well, I've got news for you, Commander. Rules don't matter in this part of space. Suddenly, the pirate captain cut off the communication and ordered his crew to board the dust skimmer. Jero's heart pounded in his chest. Vixa, you need to stop them. Vixa stood up straight, looking directly at him. I am following the protocol, she said again, her voice unwavering. The Empire will handle this. Moments later, just as the pirates began to board, something unexpected happened. The ship's alarm went off again. This time, it was a very different signal. A voice filled the comms. This is Imperial Fleet Commander Arlen of the Aegis. All pirate ships in the vicinity are under arrest for illegal activities. Stand down immediately. Jero blinked in surprise as the pirate ship's engines suddenly powered down. The pirates froze, clearly not expecting the sudden appearance of an Imperial fleet. Thank you, Vixa said quietly, nodding to the now silent communication panel. The Empire's response was swift and proper. Jero stood there, stunned. The pirates, once a massive threat, were now just floating targets for the Empire. He turned to Vixa. Well, I guess the rules work this time, he muttered, still feeling a little dizzy from the tension. Vixa simply nodded, still as calm as ever. The dust skimmer was back on its regular route, heading toward Station G47. After the pirate incident, things had settled down, at least on the outside. Inside, things were complicated. Jero sat in the galley, staring at his datapad. He was reading an old news article about the Empire's new regulations. It didn't make him feel better. It was all just rules. Rules for every little thing. Can you believe this? Jero muttered to himself, tapping the screen. Everything has a rule now. No shortcuts, no quick fixes. Just follow the path. Loom, the ship's AI, responded cheerfully. You know, Captain, that's actually quite efficient. No need to think too much. Jero glared at the screen. Maybe, but sometimes thinking is what saves us. As if on cue, Vixa entered the room, her small figure marching in with the usual determination. She was holding her datapad, once again reading something that seemed important. Captain Jaro, she said, without even looking up. I have reviewed the cargo manifest. We need to recalibrate the weights on the crates in Bay 3. Jero rubbed his forehead. The crates are fine, Vixa. They've been stacked like that for years. Years of poor stacking, she replied. And the crates are heavier than reported. If we encounter turbulence, we'll lose the load. Jero sighed. It's a minor risk. I've got it handled. You do not, she said firmly. And this is not how the Empire does things. Her words were the same every time. The Empire this, the Empire that. Jero didn't mind a good rule now and then, but this, it felt like they were always being washed. Later that day, the ship made a brief stop at a small refueling station just outside of G47's orbit. The station was empty, except for a few workers running basic maintenance on their own ships. Jaro, however, saw it as the perfect opportunity to make a quick pit stop. Vixa, he said as she stood on the bridge, eyes glued to the monitor. How about we take a small detour to pick up some extra cargo? We can make a quick profit and still get to station G47 on time. Vixa didn't even glance up from her screen. We must stay on course. Any deviation is not acceptable. Look, we're talking about a small detour. It's a perfect chance to make some credits on the side. No one will know. The Empire will know, Vixa replied. They always know. Jero groaned. You really think the Empire has eyes on every little ship out here? Vixa's voice remained steady, but there was a hint of firmness behind it. The Empire has eyes everywhere. You just don't notice them until it's too late. Jero let out a frustrated sigh. Fine. I get it. We'll just follow your perfect little route. As they continued on the scheduled path to station G47, Jero couldn't help but feel the weight of the routine. The same flight plans, the same cargo checklists, the same sterile reports. Everything was about control, about doing things exactly right. There was no room for flexibility, no room for improvisation, just the rules. That night, Jero sat at the table with the rest of the crew, half eating his meal while staring at his datapad. Tarn, the mechanic, was barely looking up from his food, and Miko was quietly sipping her drink. The quiet tension was almost suffocating. I don't know how you do it, Jero said to no one in particular. How do you live like this? Every second of the day mapped out, every choice controlled. Vixa, who had been silently reading her reports, finally responded. It is not about control. It is about safety and order. Safety and order. Jaro repeated. You know, sometimes taking a risk is what keeps us alive. Vixa set her datapad down and looked him straight in the eye. Taking risks is what gets people killed. Jero felt his frustration rising. You really believe that, don't you? That every decision has to be calculated, every outcome controlled. But that's not how the world works, Vixa. Sometimes we have to trust our instincts, not some rulebook. Vixa's expression didn't change. Instincts have led to chaos. The Empire has learned that. Jero didn't reply right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Maybe the Empire doesn't have all the answers. Maybe it's the humans who still know how to adapt, how to think on our feet. The conversation ended there, but the tension between them lingered. The ship continued its journey to station G47, and the crew continued to follow Vix's strict guidelines. But Jero's words stayed with her. She wasn't used to thinking that way, about flexibility, about adapting to situations in real time. Vixa wasn't sure what to think of it, But she was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was something to be said for the human way. The dust skimmer was entering the final stretch of its journey to Station G47 when an unexpected signal crackled through the ship's communication system. The message was faint but urgent, coming from a nearby freighter. Jero leaned forward in his seat, staring at the flashing red alert on the dashboard. "Loom, what's that?" "Captain Jaro, we are receiving a distress signal from the freighter Artemis." Loom replied in its usual calm tone. "It is requesting immediate assistance." Jero glanced at the small screen. The Artemis was a well-known cargo ship that had recently been flagged for irregularities, but they were not a direct threat. He looked over at Vixa, who was standing across the room, her arms crossed and eyes fixed on the display. "We should help them," Jero said, his voice firm. "They're in trouble." Vixa, without hesitation, shook her head. "That is not our duty. We must stay on course." "But they're in danger," Jero protested. "We can't just ignore them." Vixa didn't flinch. "The Empire's protocols state that if there is no direct threat to our vessel, we are to continue the mission. No deviations." "But—" "No," Vixa interrupted. "The rules are clear. If we help, we risk delaying our mission and violating Empire orders." Jero felt a lump form in his throat. He had known she was strict, but this was different. "So, we just leave them out there." "Following the rules is not about what feels right," Vixa said, her voice calm but stern. "It's about ensuring that everything is done by the book. Chaos leads to failure, and failure cannot be tolerated." Jero took a deep breath, trying to calm his anger. This wasn't the first time he had faced a decision like this, but it was the first time he had someone so rigid, so unbending, standing in the way of what felt like the right thing to do. He turned to the crew, who were waiting for his decision. Tarn looked concerned, his hand hovering over a wrench he hadn't yet used. Mika stared at the communication panel, her expression unreadable. "Jaro," Tarn began, his voice low. Maybe we could just check it out. If it's bad, we can turn back." Jaro hesitated. He knew Vixa would never go for it, but as he glanced at the faces of his crew, he couldn't shake the feeling that ignoring the distress call wasn't the right choice. "I can't just ignore this," Jaro said firmly. "I'm sorry, Vixa, but we're helping them." Vixa's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. "You are making a mistake," she said. "But I will not stop you. This ship's course is yours to decide." Jero nodded, feeling a surge of determination. It was time to trust his instincts. "Loom, change course. Plot a path to the Artemis." The ship's AI responded immediately, recalculating their route. The dust skimmer changed course, heading toward the distress signal. As they approached, the freighter came into view, a large, bulky ship with visible signs of damage to its outer hull. It was drifting slowly with no power. Jero immediately activated the comms. "Artemis, this is the dust skimmer. We're here to help. What's the situation?" A crackling voice answered, sounding strained. "Thank you. We've been hit by debris. Our engines are down, and we can't power up the shields. We're sitting ducks out here." Jero turned to Mika. "Can you pinpoint where the damage is?" Mika quickly pulled up the scanner. "It looks like the engines took the worst hit. They're leaking coolant and fuel." Jero's mind raced. If the fuel tanks exploded, it could take both ships down. He needed to act fast. "We'll send a repair team over," he said, looking at Tarn. "Get your gear ready." Tarn nodded, his usual grumpy expression replaced by focused determination. "Aye, Captain." Vixa stood by, arms crossed, watching them prepare. "This is unnecessary," she muttered. Jaro ignored her, grabbing his spacesuit. "You're free to stay here, Commander. I'll take the crew." As Jaro suited up, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision. It wasn't just about helping another ship. It was about showing his crew that he still trusted them to make the right choice, even if the rules said otherwise. The airlock opened, and Jaro, Tarn, and Mika stepped out into the vacuum of space, heading toward the Artemis. The damage was worse than they thought. The freighter's engine room was in ruins, and the coolant leaks were getting worse. Tarn immediately got to work, sealing off the damage while Jarrow and Mika tried to stabilize the power grid. "Good thing we brought the backup tools," Mika said, connecting a cable to the damaged engine. "Yeah, this is gonna take a while," Jarrow replied, trying not to sound worried. Tarn paused, looking up from his work. "We'll fix it. We always do." Jarrow smiled, feeling a little lighter. Maybe breaking the rules wasn't such a bad thing after all. After several hours of intense work, the crew of the dust skimmer had managed to stabilize the Artemis. Tarn had sealed off the coolant leaks, and Mika had restored power to the engine room, though the repairs would take a lot longer to fully complete. Jarrow stood outside the airlock, taking off his helmet and breathing in the recycled air of the Artemis' cramped hallways. He wiped his brow, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. Helping another ship wasn't the simple fix he'd imagined. It had been tiring, difficult work, and yet, despite everything, he felt a sense of accomplishment. They had done something good. "You did well, Jarrow," Mika said, as she came up behind him, still wearing her spacesuit. "The freighter's back on its feet, thanks to you." Jarrow turned to look at her, offering a tired smile. "We all did well. Tarn's the real hero. He was the one who got in there and patched it all up." Tarn, who was still working on finishing the repairs in the engine room, gave a half-hearted wave. "Don't get too excited. There's still a lot of work to do, but yeah, we're good for now." "Right," Jarrow said, nodding. He glanced over at Vixa, who was standing off to the side with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For the first time since they'd helped the Artemis, Jarrow felt a slight hesitation. Vixa had remained silent the entire time, watching them with that cold, calculating look in her eyes. But she had never stopped them, even when Jarrow had decided to ignore her orders. It was clear that Vixa followed the rules to the letter, no matter the cost. But Jarrow was starting to wonder if she was beginning to see something else. "Commander," Jarrow said, walking toward her, "you know we did the right thing, right?" Vixa turned her gaze to him, her tiny figure standing strong against the weight of the moment. "You did what you felt was right," she replied, her voice even. "The Empire would have done otherwise." Jarrow couldn't help but smile a little. And maybe that's the problem. "Vixa, the Empire's way isn't always the right way." Vixa didn't respond, but there was something in her eyes that seemed to soften just a little. Back on the dust skimmer, they continued their journey towards Station G47. The repairs on the Artemis had taken longer than expected, but the crew was back on track, though a little weary from the long hours. Jarrow sat at the navigation table, reviewing their arrival time, while Mika worked on a list of supplies to purchase at the station. Tarn was back in the engine room, checking their systems one more time, and Vixa was, well, still Vixa. She had retreated to her usual spot, scanning through her data pads, as if nothing had happened. But Jarrow wasn't fooled. He could feel the change in her, even if it was subtle. "Loom," Jarrow said, glancing at the AI screen. "How far are we from G47? "Approaching Station G47 in approximately 5 hours, Captain," Loom responded. Jarrow stretched, leaning back in his chair. "That's good. At least we're back on track." But even as he said it, a strange thought gnawed at him. Was this really the right path? Was sticking to the rules always the best way? "Mika," he said, looking over at her, "what do you think about all of this? The rules, the Empire, and how we've been doing things?" Mika paused for a moment, glancing up from her screen. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've always just followed along, like most people. I've never really thought much about the Empire's way of doing things." Jarrow raised an eyebrow. "And now," she shrugged. "Now, I guess I'm starting to see there's more to it. Maybe sometimes the Empire's rules don't make sense. And maybe, sometimes, We need to make our own choices. Jero felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't alone in thinking that breaking the rules could be the right choice. Just then, Vix's voice broke through the silence. "Captain, I've reviewed our previous actions. Your decision to help the Artemis was a deviation from protocol." Jero met her gaze. "I know, but I stand by it." Vixa didn't look angry. She didn't even seem disappointed. Instead, she simply nodded. "I understand. Perhaps there is merit in flexibility." Jero was taken aback. Was that a compliment? Vixa continued. "The Empire has its ways. But maybe you're right. There is more than one way to reach the same goal." Jero blinked. "Are you saying you agree with me?" Vix's eyes were steady as always, but there was something softer in her tone now. "I am saying that perhaps, sometimes, rules need to be adjusted for the situation at hand." Jero couldn't help but smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, Vixa was beginning to see things his way. "Looks like we're not so different after all," Jero said, giving her a teasing grin. The dust skimmer had finally arrived at Station G47. The large station loomed in the distance, its massive docking bays stretching across the stars. It was a bustling hub of trade, a place where everything from food supplies to rare technology was bought and sold. For Jero and his crew, it was a welcome stop, an opportunity to restock and, hopefully, earn a little profit. Jero stood at the helm, gazing out at the station. "All right, everyone. We've got a few hours before we need to check in with customs. Take what you need, but let's stay focused. We don't want to draw unnecessary attention." Vixa, standing at her usual post, nodded. "I will conduct a full systems check while we're docked. I suggest the crew follow protocol and avoid unnecessary delays." Jero gave her a small grin. "No promises, Commander. Tarn, Mika, you know the drill. Let's get the supplies we need and be back before we get caught in any red tape." The crew broke off to handle their various tasks. Tarn, eager to stretch his legs, headed straight for the maintenance shops. Mika, always keeping a low profile, slipped into the marketplace to gather new parts and supplies. Vixa stayed with the dust skimmer, keeping an eye on the systems, and Jero wandered off to meet with a few contacts he had on the station. For Jero, Station G47 was both a blessing and a curse. It offered opportunities to connect with old friends, but it also carried risks. The Empire's presence was heavy here, with agents monitoring every ship and trader. Any slip-up could bring unwanted attention. As he walked through the crowded station halls, Jero couldn't help but notice how easy it was to blend in. The bustling crowd of traders, workers, and travelers moved in a steady stream, all busy with their own agendas. No one noticed him. No one noticed the dust skimmer, either, as it was docked near the edge of the station, far from the prying eyes of Empire officials. Jero made his way to a small cafe tucked in the corner of the station. Inside, the usual group of contacts sat, exchanging hushed words over steaming cups. He slid into a seat across from them, flashing a quick grin. "Jaro, it's been too long." One of the traders, a tall man named Kor, greeted him with a slap on the back. "What's it been? 2 years since we last saw you." "Something like that," Jaro replied, accepting the offered drink. "I've been busy, but you know how it is." They exchanged pleasantries before getting down to business. Jaro knew that Station G47 was one of the best places to find useful supplies, and sometimes rare deals that the Empire would never approve of. But it wasn't all about profit. There were always rumors of potential jobs or opportunities that could make a good payday. Kor leaned in close. "There's a shipment coming in soon. Very high value. I've heard whispers of it being tied to something important. The kind of job the Empire wouldn't want anyone messing with." Jero's interest piqued. "What kind of shipment?" Kor smirked. "Weapons. The Empire's got its hands on some new tech, but there's a buyer looking to make a move. I think you and your crew might want in." Jero thought about it for a moment. The Empire had its own ways of keeping secrets, but weapons were always a big deal. If the buyer was someone who could get past the Empire's watchful eye, it could be a lucrative job. But there were risks, big ones. "I'll think about it," Jero said finally, standing up to leave. "I'll let you know." As he walked back toward the docking bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The thought of crossing the Empire, again, made his gut tighten. But he also knew that his crew was getting more and more used to breaking the rules. This was their life now. When Jaro returned to the dust skimmer, the crew was already gathered in the galley, going over their supplies and checking in on the repairs. Vixa was, predictably, organizing the cargo hold, while Mika was studying her datapad. Tarn was pacing near the door, a look of impatience on his face. "We're all set," Jero said as he entered. "I made contact with some old friends. There might be a job available. But it's complicated." "Complicated?" Mika raised an eyebrow. "How?" Jero took a seat, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "There's a shipment coming in. Guns, new tech. The kind of stuff the Empire doesn't want out in the open." Tarn's eyes lit up. So, a high-risk, high-reward job. The tension aboard the dust skimmer was palpable. The crew had gathered around the table, each person silently processing the decision ahead. Jero sat at the head of the table, his gaze shifting from Vixa to Tarn to Mika. The opportunity was risky, but it could change everything. The thought of working outside the Empire's shadow was tempting, yet dangerous. Jero looked at Vixa, who had been quiet since their conversation earlier. Her expression remained unreadable, though her small stature seemed to carry the weight of the decision. "I know what the rules say," Jero began, breaking the silence. "The Empire always wants things done by the book. But we've seen how things really work, how they push us into situations where we don't have a choice." Vixa met his gaze, her lips pressing into a thin line. "The Empire's order is law," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Without it, there is only chaos." Jero leaned forward, trying to make her see things differently. "Maybe order isn't everything. Maybe there's a better way. We don't have to keep following the same path that's been laid out for us. We can make our own choices." Vixa studied him for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. "You speak of freedom, Jaro, but freedom has consequences. It is not without cost." "I know," Jaro replied quietly, "but we've already paid the price, haven't we? We're out here on the edge, far from the Empire's control. If we keep following their rules, we'll be stuck in a system that doesn't care about us." Mika, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "I agree with Jaro. The Empire has its own agenda, and we're just cogs in their machine. If we don't start making our own decisions, we'll just keep following orders until we've got no choice." Tarn, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped and glanced at Jaro. "I'm all for a little chaos, as long as it means we get to live on our own terms. We can make a profit, take on a job, and get out before the Empire even knows what hit them." Jero smiled slightly, relieved to see his crew starting to understand. This wasn't just about following orders anymore, it was about taking control of their own destiny. "But this job, Jaro," Vixa interjected, "it's dangerous. We've seen the consequences of breaking the Empire's laws. You cannot ignore the risks." Jaro nodded. He knew the dangers, but this was a turning point. They had been pushed into corners for too long. It was time to decide if they would remain as pawns or take a step into the unknown. "I'm not ignoring the risks," Jero said, "but we can handle it. Together, we can make it work. We've already taken on worse missions." The silence that followed felt heavy. Vixa's sharp eyes never left Jaro, but there was something in her expression that had softened. "I have always followed the rules," she said slowly, her voice quieter now. "But perhaps I have been too rigid. There is value in trusting your crew, Jaro. I understand that now." Jaro's heart lifted at her words. It was a breakthrough. Vixa had always been the one to follow orders without question, But now, she was considering the possibility of making their own decisions, even if it meant stepping outside the Empire's framework. "So, what do you say?" Jaro asked, his voice steady. "We take the job, risk it all, and make a choice that's ours to make." Vixa paused, her eyes flickering toward the rest of the crew. Tarn was looking at her expectantly, and Mika was nodding as if in agreement. Finally, Vixa nodded, though her expression remained serious. "Very well," she said. "We will take this job, but we do it carefully, with full awareness of what we face. I will not let anyone on this ship make reckless decisions." Jaro smiled, the weight of the moment settling in. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The crew spent the next few hours preparing for the job. They were taking a risk, but they weren't fools. Every detail had to be planned carefully. Mika was in charge of gathering intel on the buyer, making sure they knew exactly what they were walking into. Tarn began checking the ship's weapons and systems, ensuring everything was in perfect working order. Vixa reviewed the crew's readiness, making sure no one was going into this mission unprepared. Jaro stood by the cockpit window, staring out into the dark expanse of space. The station was still visible, but it was fading in the distance as the dust skimmer set course for the location of the shipment. This was it. They were about to step into the unknown. But for the first time in a long while, Jaro didn't feel afraid. He felt alive. "Loom," Jaro said, turning toward the ship's eye. "Plot a course to the buyer's location. We're ready." "Course set, Captain," Loom responded, its usual calm tone filling the room. Jaro took a deep breath. "Team, it's time to make our move." The crew nodded, their expressions determined. There was no turning back now. The dust skimmer glided through the emptiness of space, the hum of its engine steady and strong. The crew had spent the last several hours preparing for the mission. They were on edge, but they also felt a certain confidence. They had made their choice, and now there was no turning back. Jaro stood in the cockpit, staring out at the stars as they drifted by. The buyer's location was still a few hours away, but the crew had already checked and rechecked their plans. They were ready. Vixa entered the cockpit, her footsteps light on the metal floor. She stood next to Jaro, her gaze steady. "Everything is set," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of something else, something like uncertainty. "We all know what's at stake." Jaro glanced at her, a small smile on his face. "I know, but we've always known what's at stake. The difference is now we get to choose." Vixa didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, as if considering his words. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice quieter. "Do you think we're making the right choice?" Jaro turned to face her fully. "I don't know, but I do know that doing nothing isn't an option anymore. The Empire controls too much of our lives. This is our chance to change that." Vix's eyes softened, just slightly. "I spent my whole life following orders. But now I see that maybe there's more to life than that." Jaro placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We're all in it together." Meanwhile, Tarn and Mika were preparing their own part of the mission. Tarn was making sure the ship's weapons systems were fully operational, while Mika was studying the data on the buyer and the location where they would make the exchange. "We need to be ready for anything," Tarn said as he ran a final diagnostic on the ship's weapons systems. "If this goes sideways, we need to be able to defend ourselves." Mika glanced up from her datapad. "I've got eyes on the buyer's network. They're heavily guarded, but there's a small opening in their security protocols. We can slip in, but we need to move quickly." "Sounds like a plan," Tarn said, giving her a nod. "I'll keep the ship ready. You focus on the details." Mika returned her attention to the datapad, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've got the coordinates locked. We just need to stay on course." As the hours passed, the tension among the crew grew. Each of them knew the risks. If they failed, the Empire's wrath would be swift and unforgiving. But there was something else hanging in the air: hope. hope that they could break free from the chains that had bound them for so long. Jero stood up from his chair, walking to the crew's gathering place. He found Mika, Tarn, and Vixa already there, preparing for the final leg of their journey. "We're almost there," Jero said, his voice steady. "Let's go over the plan one last time." Mika nodded. "We make the exchange in a secluded dock. The buyer's men will be there, but I can disable their security long enough for us to slip past them." Tarn cracked his knuckles. "Once we've got the goods, we move fast. No messing around." Vixa stepped forward, her posture confident. "I'll cover the back. If anything goes wrong, we'll need to retreat quickly." Jero looked at his crew. "And no matter what happens, we stick together. We're not leaving anyone behind." Each of them gave a silent nod in agreement. The dust skimmer neared the buyer's location, and the tension was at its peak. The stars outside the cockpit window were just a blur as Jero adjusted the controls, bringing the ship into position. They were close now, so close they could almost taste it. "Loom," Jero said, his voice calm but firm. "Are we clear?" "We are clear, Captain," the AI responded, its tone as neutral as always. "The buyer's location is secure, and there are no immediate signs of Empire activity." Jero exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. This was it. He glanced at Vixa, who gave him a small nod. Tarn and Mika were ready, and everything was in place. "We move on my mark," Jero said. "Let's make it count." The dust skimmer docked at the designated port. The crew disembarked, their hearts racing as they moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors. Mika led the way, her datapad in hand, guiding them through the security system's blind spots. When they reached the exchange point, they found the buyer's men waiting. They were well armed, but not expecting a fight. Mika quickly tapped a few commands on her datapad, and the security systems flickered to life, giving them a brief window of time to move. Jero stepped forward, speaking to the buyer's leader. "We're here for the goods." The buyer, a tall man with sharp eyes, nodded and gestured to his men to open the cargo hold. Inside, crates filled with valuable weapons and high-tech gadgets gleamed in the low light. Jero's crew exchanged a quick glance. Everything was going according to plan. But just as they were about to complete the exchange, alarms blared. The door behind them slammed shut, and armed guards flooded into the room. "We've got company," Tarn said, his hand already reaching for his weapon. Jero's heart raced, but he didn't panic. "Stay calm. We're getting out of here." As the guards advanced, Vixa took a step forward, her small frame surprisingly fierce. "Cover the exit. We'll fight our way out if we have to." Jero nodded. "Move fast. We're not sticking around." The crew sprang into action, weapons drawn. This mission was far from over, but they had made it this far. Together, they would face whatever came next.